Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping straight into a totally fascinating academic framework that forecasts a radically divided future for, well, the money right in our pockets. We're unpacking a 2026 paper by Michael R. Williams. And here's the kicker. He doesn't just predict the next iteration of the global financial system. He predicts two of them, growing right alongside each other and potentially tearing the global economy completely in half. It's a massive concept, and it has huge implications for how you and I are going to store and transfer value in the coming decades. Now, we're constantly told our financial future is purely digital, right? Completely centralized. Literally every headline points to this frictionless, cashless society. And sure, that makes for a great tech pitch. But wait a second. What about the systems, the physical cash, and the everyday people that persist completely outside of that digital umbrella? Seriously, what actually happens to the money that the digital world leaves behind or honestly actively pushes away? Well, let's dive into the core contrast of today's framework. On one side, we have what's called the emergent financial system. This is the highly programmed, digital, identity-anchored network we literally hear about every single day. But on the flip side is what's termed the remnant financial system. And guys, this isn't just some shadow economy or a bucket of leftover cash. It is a persistent, active counterpart. It thrives exactly where the emergent system just doesn't reach or where people actively refuse to let it in. So here is our roadmap for today. We're going to start with defining the emergent and the remnant. Then we'll break down the 8 specific configurations of this remnant. After that, we'll look at the 3 pathways that actually create these parallel systems, explore the capture and decay dynamic, and finally, we'll wrap up with what this means for our bifurcated financial future. Let's get into it. Kicking things off with part 1, the emergent and the remnant, defining these dual systems. So we really have to unpack these two massive financial architectures. And let's start with the emergent system. This is basically the technocratic vision built by central banks and global institutions over the last century. We're talking about central bank digital currencies, the tokenization of real-world assets, and programmable payment rails. Think about that for a second. Money that can literally be dictated by code to determine where and how it can be spent. Throw in biometric authentication and AI-enabled compliance, and what do you get? You get a system that's highly efficient, deeply integrated, and built entirely on digital tracking. But in sharp contrast, we have the remnant financial system. Now, the absolutely crucial takeaway here is that the remnant isn't just, obsolete coins gathering dust in your junk drawer. Not at all. It is a persistent, living ecosystem. It serves populations outside that digital umbrella. Maybe that's due to rural infrastructure gaps, maybe it's a deliberate refusal of digital surveillance by privacy advocates, or maybe it's just active opposition for political reasons. Think of it essentially as the backup generator for the global economy, humming along right parallel to the main grid. Moving on to Section 2, the 8 configurations of the remnant. Basically, the taxonomy of these factions. What's super fascinating about this framework is how it breaks this massive remnant down into 8 distinct configurations. Instead of just lumping everyone outside the mainstream into one giant alternative bucket, it maps out these incredibly diverse groups. You've got your classic cash and coin holdouts, your hard money gold and silver advocates, but then you also have sovereign individuals cypherpunks using crypto, faith-based communities relying on relational trust, solidarity economy groups, informal networks of migrants, geopolitical bloc-aligned nations actively resisting the US dollar, and of course, excluded populations who simply lack access altogether. Just to ground this taxonomy in reality for a minute, let's look at what these configurations actually look like out in the wild. We're talking about Amish community credit systems operating entirely without digital debt. We are talking about local time banks where communities literally trade hours of labor instead of traditional currency. We're looking at global Hawala remittance networks. Diaspora communities use these to move vast sums of value purely on interpersonal trust, totally bypassing formal banking rails. And yeah, the enduring persistence of good old physical cash. These are highly functional parallel economies. And this diversity really comes to life when you map these factions out along 2 specific dimensions. If you look at their technological substrate, it ranges wildly, from analog materials like physical gold, all the way to cryptographic ledgers and even purely relational trust networks. Then, if you track their motive for separation, it gets even more interesting. Are they voluntarily withdrawing, like the cypherpunks? Are they involuntarily excluded just because of poverty or geography? Or are they actively adversarial, like those bloc-aligned states trying to de-dollarize? It just proves that this whole alternative financial world is absolutely not a monolith. All right, on to Section 3, Three pathways to parallel systems. Basically, why do these groups even form? We know who uses these shadow systems now, but why do people actually pack up and migrate to them in the first place? Well, factions tend to emerge through three specific pathways. First up is the design failure cascade. This happens when the emergent system actively fails or restricts its users. Think about accounts being frozen during political protests. That pushes citizens instantly toward cash or crypto. Second is the legitimacy failure pathway, where people just completely lose ideological trust in mainstream financial governance, so they choose to opt out. And the third is the adoption friction pathway, which honestly often just boils down to poor infrastructure, like rural communities lacking the internet bandwidth to even support a central bank digital currency in the first place. Let's look at Section 4 now, the capture and decay dynamic, systems in conflict. All of this builds into an ongoing struggle because obviously, the emergent system doesn't just sit back and watch the remnant grow unchecked. We see this fascinating capture and decay dynamic, where the mainstream actively absorbs threats to its dominance. Cryptocurrency is literally the perfect example of this irony. What started out as a purely cypherpunk anti-establishment tool has completely fractured. Right now, we have captured institutional crypto. Think regulated Bitcoin ETFs managed by Wall Street. But as those assets get captured by institutions, their original rebellious function starts to decay, and that leaves behind a much smaller, highly adversarial residual crypto faction, focused entirely on privacy and self-custody. Basically, the mainstream absorbs what it can monetize and alienates what it can't. Which brings us to Section 5, our bifurcated financial future. What does life look like in 2046? So, what does this actually look like over the next 2 decades? The research neutrally predicts a highly fragmented reality. To quote the paper directly here, the most probable trajectory is a structurally bifurcated coexistence with rising decoupling. So what's the translation for that? The emergent and remnant systems aren't actually going to destroy each other. Instead, they're going to completely decouple. We are heading toward a future where different populations operate on totally distinct, parallel infrastructures that barely interact at all. One is going to be heavily monitored and digital, and the other will be analog, cryptographic, and profoundly separate. The author actually gives explicit recommendations for how ordinary citizens should navigate this shift. According to the framework, unreflective participation in just the mainstream system is becoming a major risk. The paper suggests developing a deliberate position through cross-system diversification. What this means in practice is holding your standard assets in the emergent digital system so you can participate in modern commerce, sure, but actively maintaining physical cash, precious metals, or self-custody digital assets in the remnant system. Why? To guarantee true operational resilience when one side inevitably experiences a shock or a failure. Which brings us to the ultimate takeaway for your own wallet. As these two massive paradigms pull further and further apart, which system does your wealth rely on today? If the digital grid went dark or your access was suddenly revoked tomorrow, do you actually have a foothold in the remnant? We aren't just looking at some abstract academic theory about the future of money here. We are looking at a taxonomy of tomorrow that really demands an answer today. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you on the next one.